It was supposed to be a simple drive across the barren expanse of West Texas. Just me, the open road, and the endless dark sky above. I was headed to visit my brother, and the journey should have been straightforward. But somewhere around midnight, the desert started to feel less like an open road and more like a trap, a vast, empty cage. The highway was deserted, not a car in sight, and my old sedan was struggling to keep pace. I cranked up the radio to drown out the ominous rattle from under the hood, but all I got was static. No cell service either, of course. I kept telling myself I'd be fine, just a few more hours to go. I didn't believe it, though, and when my engine started sputtering, my heart sank. The car coughed and stuttered, then with a final shudder, died completely. I was left in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a sea of black, the cold wind howling outside. I tried starting it again. Once. Twice. Nothing. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, hoping someone would drive by, but the road was as empty as it had been for hours. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. I was stranded, miles from anything, with no way to call for help. Then, through the darkness, I saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. At first I thought I was seeing things, but no. There it was, steady and persistent, a beacon in the void. It looked like a gas station, a small isolated spot of light on an otherwise endless stretch of dark highway. Relief washed over me. Maybe someone there could help me out. I got out of the car and began pushing it towards the light. The wind was colder than I'd expected, biting through my jacket, and each step felt heavier than the last. It took longer than I thought it would, but I finally managed to roll the car to the edge of the gas station's lot. It was an old, run-down place, paint peeling, windows smeared with grime, and a neon sign that buzzed erratically, like it might go out at any moment. As I got closer, I noticed someone sitting on a bench near the entrance. A man, hunched over, barely visible in the dim light. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he worked there. Or maybe he was just a traveler like me, taking a break from the road. Either way, I wasn't alone anymore. I approached him, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, but he didn't move. "Hey," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My car broke down. "Do you know if there's a mechanic around here?" No response. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, as if he hadn't heard me. I took a step closer. "Excuse me?" I said, louder this time. Still nothing. I was close enough now to make out his silhouette. He was wearing a long dark coat, his hands resting limply in his lap, his head slightly bowed. Something about the way he sat there, so still and silent, sent a chill down my spine. "Sir?" I tried again, but my voice wavered. I didn't like this. Something felt wrong. It was the stillness, I think. The way he didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me, like he wasn't really there. I thought about just turning around and getting back into my car. But then he moved. Slowly, almost mechanically, he turned his head towards me. The light from the gas station flickered across his face, and for a moment I wished I hadn't seen it. His skin was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes, God, his eyes were wide, unblinking, like they were trying to see through me, right into my soul. There was no warmth in them, no hint of life, just a cold, hollow stare. My heart started to pound, and I took a step back. I just need help with my car," I stammered, but the words felt pointless, empty. The man didn't reply, didn't move, just kept staring at me, his eyes locked onto mine. I felt a surge of fear, the kind that makes your blood run cold and your limbs heavy. I forced myself to turn away, to head back to my car. I didn't care if he could help me or not anymore. I just needed to get out of there. But as I reached my car, I glanced back over my shoulder and he was still watching me, his gaze unwavering, like he was waiting for something. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the slot. Finally, the lock clicked, and I yanked the door open, practically throwing myself inside. I jammed the key into the ignition, praying the engine would start, and to my relief, it did. I didn't waste a second. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires skidding on the gravel, and then peeled out of the gas station lot, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still there, sitting on that bench, his face half hidden in the shadows. But as I looked closer, I saw it, just the faintest hint of a smile, curling at the corners of his lips, as if he knew something I didn't, as if he was laughing at me, mocking my fear. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from that place, from that man. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, and I slowed down, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked in the mirror again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the back seat, just barely visible in the dark, there was a shape, a shadow that hadn't been there before. I could see the outline of a head, shoulders, and those eyes. Those same wide, unblinking eyes staring at me through the mirror. I didn't have time to scream. The car swerved off the road, and everything went black. It happened about a year ago, but I still can't shake the feeling. I was driving through rural Pennsylvania, heading home from a business trip that had run later than expected. It was already past midnight, and I was exhausted. The highway was a lonely, empty stretch, with nothing but dense forest on either side, and the fog was thick, rolling across the road like something out of a horror movie. My headlights barely cut through it, and my GPS had died hours ago. I was relying on memory and a few road signs to get me home, but the deeper I went, the more I realized I was lost. Every turn looked the same dark trees, the same fog, the same sense of suffocating isolation. I felt like I was driving in circles, every mile stretching longer than the last. The only sound was the rhythm of my windshield wipers, monotonous, almost hypnotic, as they swept the mist away. I was alone, cut off from the world, and I could feel the unease gnawing at my gut. I knew I shouldn't have taken that detour, but it was supposed to be a shortcut. Now, I was just trying to keep my eyes open and find a way out. Then through the fog, I saw it. A gas station. The neon sign flickered a dull, sickly green. But it was a welcome sight. I felt relief flood over me. Finally, at a place to stop, maybe get some directions, and if I was lucky, a coffee to keep me awake for the rest of the drive. I pulled in, my tires crunching on the gravel, and parked under the lone light that hummed above one of the old rusted pumps. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The building was small, paint peeling off the walls, and the windows were dark, obscured by heavy curtains. There was no one around, no cars, not even the faintest sign of life. The air was still, and even the fog seemed to hesitate, hanging around the edges of the station like it didn't want to come any closer. I stepped out of the car, feeling the chill of the night seep into my bones. The sign was still on, buzzing quietly, and the pump was ready, as if it was expecting me. I walked up to the door, and that's when I noticed the heavy padlock hanging from it. My heart sank a little. Why would a gas station have its sign lit up if it was closed? I tried the door handle, but it didn't budge. I knocked, hoping someone was inside, but there was no response. just the echo of my own fist against the wood. I peered through the windows, but the glass was filthy, smeared with something I didn't want to think about. I couldn't see much, just shadows and shapes. But nothing moved. There was no flicker of light, no sign that anyone was there. I told myself that maybe they were just in the back. Maybe they hadn't heard me. So I circled around the building, looking for another entrance or at least a sign of life. But there was nothing. The back was even darker, the fog thicker, and I felt like I was walking in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The gravel crunched beneath my feet, loud in the quiet, and every step felt heavier than the last. I could feel my heart starting to race, a cold sweat creeping down my neck. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. I just wanted to get back in my car, drive away, and forget about this place. As I made my way back to the front, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small handwritten sign taped to the window. It was barely legible, the ink smeared and faded, but I could just make out the words, "Stay in your car, do not get out, do not knock." I froze, my mind racing. Was this a joke, some kind of prank? But there was nothing funny about it. The letters were jagged, written in a rush, and I could almost see the panic behind the words. I turned around, scanning the fog, half expecting someone to jump out at me. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, the fog, and that buzzing neon sign. I practically ran back to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. I didn't care how tired I was anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life, the headlights flickering on, cutting through the fog. I glanced back at the station one last time, and that's when I saw it. The fog was lifting, and the gas station was fading. I know how that sounds, but I swear it was like watching a mirage disappear. One moment it was there, the next, it was just gone. The sign, the pumps, the building, all of it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was as if it had never been there at all. I slammed the gas, my tires skidding on the gravel as I sped back onto the road. I didn't care where I was going anymore, as long as it was away from there. My heart was pounding, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I drove for what felt like hours, not daring to look in the rearview mirror, afraid of what I might see. Eventually, the fog cleared, and I found myself on a familiar highway, the one I should have been on all along. I made it home, but I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about that gas station, about that sign telling me to stay in the car. I didn't know what it meant, but I was glad I hadn't stayed to find out. A few days later, I tried to look it up, see if there were any gas stations around there that matched the description. But there was nothing. No record, no photos, nothing. It was as if the place had never existed. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe it was just a trick of the fog, or my tired mind playing games with me. But every now and then when I'm driving late at night, I think I see that sign, flickering in the distance just for a moment. And I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. I never thought I'd end up telling this story. Maybe it's the late-night bourbon or the way the wind howls outside. But I can't shake it anymore. Something about that night still doesn't sit right. I can't forget it, no matter how much I try to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. But I've told enough lies tonight. So here it is. It was a little past 2 in the morning, and I was on my way back from a friend's bachelor party in Vegas. That kind of night, you know? The kind where you've got half a mind on the road and the other half on the regretful things you said or did while trying to be the life of the party. The neon glow of the strip had long faded in the rearview mirror, and all that was left was the empty stretch of desert highway, and the occasional flicker of distant gas station lights. My car was running on fumes, and as luck would have it, a small, brightly lit gas station appeared just ahead. I remember sighing in relief. The last thing I wanted was to get stranded out there, where it felt like the desert could swallow you whole. I pulled up to a pump and cut the engine. The place was surprisingly busy for that hour. Cars coming and going, headlights cutting through the night, and a few folks milling around inside, grabbing snacks and coffee. I got out of the car, the chill desert air hitting me, jolting me awake for a moment. That's when I saw him, the attendant, an older guy, maybe in his late 60s. His face was worn, like he'd been carved out of the desert itself, with deep lines and a weathered, leathery look. His name tag said Frank, and he was helping another customer a few pumps over, moving slowly, like every step was a battle with gravity. I caught his eye for a brief second, and he nodded at me. Just a quick, weary nod, but something about it felt off. I shook it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. When he finally made his way over to me, he gave a half smile. "Sorry about the wait, sir," he said, his voice rough and gravelly, like he'd been smoking since birth. "What can I get for you?" I gave him my order, and as he started filling the tank, I noticed how deliberate his movements were. Not just slow, but careful, like he was trying to keep his hands from shaking. We exchanged the usual small talk, where I was coming from, where I was headed. He said he'd been working this graveyard shift for years, liked the quiet. I almost told him it was creepy, being out here alone at night, but something in his eyes made me think better of it. When he was done, I reached into my pocket for cash, but my phone buzzed with a message from my friend, some last-minute joke that made me chuckle, despite the eerie quiet around us. I handed over the cash, nodded a quick thanks, and turned back towards the booth to pay. That's when I noticed. The booth was empty. Frank was gone. I blinked, thinking maybe he'd gone inside to grab a receipt or something, but the door was slightly ajar, swinging gently, and there was no sign of movement. Just that empty booth, bathed in the harsh white light of the gas station, like a spotlight on a stage that had been left abandoned mid-act. I leaned back against my car, scanning the station. "Frank?" I called out, but there was no answer. The other customers had left, and now it was just me, the station, and the endless stretch of highway. I waited a few more minutes, feeling a strange knot form in my gut. Maybe he'd gone to the restroom, I thought. Maybe he was just taking a quick smoke break around the back. But my car was full, and I had no reason to stick around. I should have just driven off, left him to whatever he was doing. But something didn't feel right. It was like, I don't know how to describe it, like the silence was pressing down on me, daring me to find out where Frank had gone. I headed inside the station store. A young woman was behind the counter, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I entered. "Hey, do you know where Frank went?" I asked. She frowned, clearly irritated at having to engage. "Who?" "Frank, the old guy. He was just out there, filling up my tank." Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, then concern. "Sir, there's no one named Frank working here tonight. I've been here all shift. I haven't seen anyone else." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a prickle of fear creep up the back of my neck. "What do you mean? He was right there. He helped me. I just paid him." I pointed towards the booth as if that would somehow make him reappear. The girl's brow furrowed deeper. "Sir, I don't know who you saw, but it wasn't anyone who works here. I'm the only one on duty tonight." I stepped back outside, my heart pounding now. The pump was still there, the hose lying limply against my car, like some dead snake. I looked around, half expecting to see Frank walk out from behind the building or from inside the store, smiling that same tired smile. But there was nothing, just silence. I started to panic, thinking maybe I'd been scammed, that someone pretending to be a worker had just taken off with my money. I checked my wallet. The cash was gone, but that was expected. The tank was full, after all. But the more I thought about it, the more my mind twisted and turned, trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. I went back inside, insisting the girl call the manager. She did, reluctantly, rolling her eyes at my insistence. When the manager arrived, a guy barely older than me, looking like he'd just been roused out of bed, he listened to my story with a strange, almost pitying look. "You said his name was Frank?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Yeah," I said, a little too quickly. "That's what his name tag said." The manager sighed, glancing over at the girl behind the counter, who'd suddenly found something very interesting on the floor. "Sir, Frank used to work here. He was the night attendant, just like you described. But that was over 15 years ago." I felt my mouth go dry. "What do you mean, used to?" He died. Right there, at that booth," the manager said, nodding towards the gas station door. "Heart attack. He was working late, just like you said. No one found him until the morning." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "No, that's not possible. I talked to him. He was right there." The manager just shook his head. "I don't know what to tell you, but every now and then, people say they see him, just for a moment, filling up tanks, making small talk, and then he's gone." I didn't say another word. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove off. I didn't stop until I was miles down the highway, the gas station a distant, flickering memory in my rear-view mirror. And even now, sometimes, when I'm driving alone late at night, I catch myself glancing at the fuel gauge, wondering if I'll see that worn, tired face again. I hope to God I don't.